Good morning, and thank you for joining us. My name is Shader, and I am the Press Secretary for the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection. This we will be discussing the GP5 and GP5A general permits for newly constructed midstream compression, gas processing, and gas transmission facilities, and for newly constructed unconventional natural gas wells. We will be hearing from DEP Secretary Patrick McDonald, joining us from Marionville, Pennsylvania, for a brief introduction, and George Hartenstein, Deputy Secretary for Waste, Air, Radiation, and Remediation, to discuss the process and the contents of the permits themselves. In this presentation, we will take questions from the media only. Reporters, please put your question along with your name and affiliated media in the Q&A box in the lower right-hand corner. This work is being recorded, and we will have the recording of it on the DEP website either later today or first thing Monday morning. Mr. Terry, are you on the line with us? All right, I will hand over to you, sir.
Gail. Now, for a bit of background, there are air pollutants associated with the oil and gas industry that can impact the environment and human health. Volatile organic compounds and nitrogen oxides can lead to ozone formation, which can affect health, and methane, the primary component of natural gas, is a potent greenhouse gas. According to federal estimates, the oil and gas industry accounts for a quarter of methane emissions in the U.S. Because of the known climate and health risks associated with methane and other pollutants, Governor Tom Wolf launched his methane reduction strategy to reduce methane emissions from natural gas well sites, compressor stations, and pipelines. The goals of the strategy are to reduce emissions that harm human health, reduce potent greenhouse gas emissions that contribute to climate change, and prevent the waste of Pennsylvania's valuable natural resources. The permits we're discussing today are the first step of that strategy, establishing a threshold on methane emissions from new unconventional natural gas wells and from new compressor stations, transition stations, and other pipeline infrastructure. Before I turn back over to George Hartenstein, I just do want to take a moment to thank everyone who's participated in this process over the last more than a year now in putting together the permits, and want to particularly thank staff, including Deputy Secretary Hartenstein, as well as Christian Ramamurthy, Charles Bortz in our air quality area, Bo Riley, and all of the staff that in air quality, legal, and policy that have worked to get us to the point we are today. I'll now to Deputy Secretary for Waste, Air, Radiation, and Remediation, George Hartenstein, to walk through how the permits were developed and the permits themselves.
Thank you. The Department provided an extensive opportunity to receive public comment on the general permits and comment periods for both proposed and draft final general permits. DEP received comments from almost 9,400 individuals, organizations, engineering firms, oil gas production, midstream, and transmission facility operators. The Department has prepared a comment and response document for each public comment period, as well as a technical support document that provides details on the Department's determination of permit conditions and terms. Those documents are available on the Department's website, along with the permits and permit exemption technical guidance document. Unless permit exemption applies, all new sources of air emissions must receive approval for construction and operation under a permit. Approvals authorize construction, and the operating permit applies to the source after it is commissioned. Site be permitted either under an individual permit or a general permit. It should that GP5 and 5A only apply to minor sources. Title V major sources cannot use GP5 and GP5A. In certain instances, DEP can issue a general permit when standardized construction and operating conditions can be developed. This benefit in that it reduces the amount of review required. Authorized under a general permit, the applicant must submit an application that demonstrates the sources are eligible to use the general permit and sources can comply with the applicable terms and conditions. No condition can be modified at the time of authorization to use the general permit. oil and gas sector can be permitted under an individual permits, general permits, or regulated under a permit exemption. Conditional Permit Exemption 38 applies to conventional well sites and certain activities at unconventional well sites. Still, regulations still apply to the operation of the sources despite the exemption to obtain a permit. P5A applies to new or modified unconventional well sites and remote pigging stations. G5 applies to new or modified midstream processing, compression, and transmission facilities. The permits and the conditional permit exemption contain the most up-to-date state and federal regulatory requirements. GP5 is a revision to an existing general permit. This now covers transmission facilities, in addition to compressor and processing stations. This new version is effective August 8, 2018. Revisions to GP5 include updates to state best available technology or BAT requirements, sources including engines and turbines, references to applicable federal new source performance standards or NSPS, state BAT requirements for pigging operations, and state BAT requirements for methane control and individual sources installed at a facility. GP5A is a new general permit that applies to new or modified unconventional well sites and remote pigging stations. This permit is effective August 8, 2018. Provisions of GP5 include state BAT and federal SPS requirements for engines and compressors, leak detection and repair, pigging operations, hydrators and wellbore liquids unloading operations, and methane control at all individual sources. The quality permit exemption is a technical guidance document that contains a list of all sources, minor significance. The department is exempted from requirements to seek pre-approval of construction and operation through a permit, as under department regulations. One of the exemptions applies to the oil and gas sector, Exemption 38. Eligible for these exemptions, those are required to meet stringent criteria. The exemption does not mean the sources do not need to be complied with operating requirements established in federal or state regulations. Exemption Category 38 is divided into three subparts. 38A applies to oil and gas production facilities constructed prior to August 10, 2013. 30E applies to all conventional well sites and unconventional well sites meeting certain conditions constructed between August 10, 2013 and the 7th, 2018. And conditional Exemption 38C applies to certain unconventional well sites, remote pigging sources below emission thresholds and in certain conditions, and to temporary activities at unconventional well sites constructed on or after August 8, 2018. Major exemptions under Exemption 38B for unconventional well sites constructed between August 10, 2013 and August 8, 2018 include requirements to use green completions, conduct annual leak detection and repair, emissions below listed thresholds, and document compliance within 180 days of construction. Main conditions under Exemption 30C for unconventional well sites constructed on or after August 8, 2018 include requirements to use green completions, semi-annual according to federal standards, emit pollutants below listed thresholds, and maintain compliance records. The permits will continue Pennsylvania's leadership in addressing air emissions from oil and gas production. Permit provisions first sensible, clear, and and implementable methods to reduce methane emissions that contribute to climate change, reduce other pollutants that impact human health, and reduce waste of Pennsylvania's natural resources. Additional information on the permits and the methane strategy can be found on the Department's website. An electronic permitting platform will be used for GP5 and GP5A. Instructions and a video walkthrough of the platform are available on the Department's website today. The Department will also be conducting further online training next week. Details of that training are available on the general permit page at the Department's air permit and exemption webpage.
Thank you, George. At this time, we will take questions from reporters only. Reporters, please put your question along with your name and affiliated media in the Q&A box in the lower right-hand corner of your screen, and we will take questions for as long as time permits. This question comes from Mike Lee from E! News. Mike asks, does DE anticipate any legal challenges from the industry over these permits? And unfortunately, I can't predict entities will do, so that is going to be something that will be up to the industry. This question is asking if the new permits, GP5 and GP5A, can be applied for prior to August 8th, 2018. George?
Yes. Our e-permitting system is up and available right now, and permits can be applied for at any time, prior meeting to be issued. DEP will be, they'd be applicable. The terms and conditions will be applicable after August or after August 8th.
A question from Mike Lee. Does DEP plan to roll out methane regulations for existing sources in the oil and gas industry, and if so, when?
Yes. Now that the P5 and 5A permits are final, DEP will continue to collect information from stakeholders, examine how to establish appropriate emission control requirements for existing sources. We don't have a specific timeline, but we are currently in the regulatory process right now to continue to develop those regulations.
Additional questions? Go ahead and ask. Otherwise, George mentioned all of this information is on the DEP website. There's a link under the top pages section on the DEP homepage for methane reduction strategy. All of the permits and other supporting documents will be located there. A recording of this webinar will be posted there as well, again, either later today or first thing Monday morning. We've got one last question. And simply, is there a specific definition for constructed unconventional sites?
Yes, the terms and conditions of the general permits include a description of what is a temporary facility versus when a facility is constructed and in operation and the permit. It's based on the spud data of the well.
This time we will accept questions from news media only. Reporters, please put your name and affiliated media in the Q&A box along with your question. All the participants on the call, again, a recording of this webinar will be made available, and thank you all for participating, and have a good weekend.